Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. I'm Sammy, your host, and thankful that you're joining me today. So thank you for taking time to listen. Today we are talking about financials, and I know that doesn't necessarily think or scream marketing right out the gate, but understanding your financials and especially reforecasting and kind of planning ahead is super helpful in times like now. So with COVID, with all the things, it's so hard to really understand what the future of your organization is going to look like. And having a pulse on your financials is a big piece of that. And so I've brought Lindsey Pate, who's a dear friend of mine. I've brought her onto this podcast because she has her own business that she's growing, fundraising for, and scaling. And she also has a nonprofit that she is the president of the board for. So she just brings a lot of perspective as far as what types of things to think about, how to look at your numbers in order to make the right decisions for your business in times of crisis. And then also just in general times, right? So it's a good practice just to put in place. And I'm excited for you guys to hear this conversation and maybe take away some of the insights that she shares so that you can even use it to beef up your marketing, to get in front of new audiences, get in front of more audiences. Lindsey Pate is the CEO and co-founder at Glasshouse Grown, which is an award-winning craft cannabis business in Central Oregon. She studied biology at Sonoma State University and was recognized for many contributions as a student leader. In the cannabis space, she has also been recognized for her leadership by meeting with county planners, speaking at legislative public hearings to address the needs of cannabis producers and processors, and participating in an exclusive marijuana advisory committee for Deschutes County. Lindsey's ability to turn ideas into action ultimately led to her becoming the president of Cascade Cannabis Association, a nonprofit organization focused on giving a voice to the legal cannabis community. Lindsey's passion for cannabis advocacy and science led her to be selected by Marijuana Venture magazine for their annual 40 Under 40 feature. There's so much good stuff that happens in this conversation. Lots of things to think about, actions to take, ways to kind of prioritize where things are going. And I understand that this is not a traditional marketing podcast, but I do think that by really understanding your financials, understanding your projections can help you take things to the next level and open up more funds for marketing and branding. And I also love that Lindsey is not a financial professional. She has done a lot of this work on her own, learned a lot on her own, and she's not going to speak a lot of jargon at you that you're not going to understand, which I love. So listen to this episode and let me know what you think. But before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by our new guide, 9 Ways for Nonprofits to Make More Money Online. With so much being done online, fundraisers, your events are canceled. Now you need to reach out in new ways, from email to social media. We've created this guide to give you 9 different ways that you can increase your online fundraising and online awareness. So head on over to thefirstclick.net/fundraise. Download the guide and pick a couple steps to take and kind of start to step outside the box and make things happen for your organization online. I really think you'll find a lot of value in it. So again, that's thefirstclick.net/fundraiser. So let's get into it. You're listening to the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Sammy Bedell-Mulhern, and each week I bring you tips from myself and other experts, as well as hot seats with small business owners and entrepreneurs to demystify digital marketing and get you on your way to generating more leads and growing your business. Please join me in welcoming Lindsey Pate to the podcast. Lindsey, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I love having friends of mine that I trust and love on my podcast. So I know we've been talking about this for a while, so I'm really excited to kind of talk with you about kind of your nonprofit world, your for-profit world, and how everything kind of converges together with money.
Yeah, I mean, it's 2 different sort of beasts in terms of fundraising. But there's a lot of similarities in terms of sort of the homework that we do in order to feel comfortable taking people's money, regardless of whether it's a for-profit business or nonprofit business.
No, totally. And I know that this podcast is typically about marketing, but if we don't understand our financials, then we can't understand how we can properly market, scale, and grow our business. And so that's a lot about what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
Okay, so I also want to start off by saying you are not a CPA, you are not a financial person by nature, and I that's why I'm also really excited about this, because I feel like a lot of us don't think that's our wheelhouse, or we can't understand any of that. So before we kind of jump into some nitty gritty, why don't you walk people through kind of why financials have become a part of your day to day and why that's kind of helped you in your business and growing your business?
Yeah. So essentially for us, for my for-profit business, which is Glasshouse Grown, we're a craft cannabis farm in Central Oregon. We had to do some substantial fundraising in order to realize the infrastructure that we wanted to build. So, when you're fundraising, if you really want to have integrity behind that, you have to know your numbers, and it's more than just a dream. You really have to be able to go into documents and be able to say, here's how money is going to be spent. Here's how we've mitigated risk, and all of that. So that's what led me to get into finances. And I'll just start by saying, when we first started fundraising, I had to make flashcards basically with the language that investors use, because embarrassingly enough, I did not know all of the words that I should know. And that just screams, don't invest in me. So, from the beginning, I started learning the vocabulary. And I will also say I have an incredible business partner, Craig, who is also my brother-in-law, who is really great with Excel, has a knack for numbers. And he doesn't have a background necessarily in finance, but together he and I were able to kind of stumble through what it takes to confidently close funds. And then I guess I would also add, having a background in science personally helps me too, because I'm very curious. And so it's not fun to jump into numbers, but it is really cool. Like once you know, it's very interesting because you realize how you can grow your business, where you have leaks, where you can trim fat, all of that good stuff.
Well, I think it's just great, and I'm thankful that we have somebody like you talking about this honestly, as opposed to a CPA or a bookkeeper, or somebody in economics or finance. I just feel like anybody can do it. You've had amazing success. You've had some wins, some losses, but you've definitely figured it out. And I love that you have note cards. I think that's really smart to speak the language, because in general, everything we do is a different language, right? Like in the cannabis industry, it's a different language. In marketing, it's a different language. In finance. And so understanding that baseline, if you can just understand that, you get over so many hurdles and can just move forward into the next phase.
Yeah.
So I think that's awesome. So we're talking obviously about fundraising, and I love your perspective on both fundraising on the for-profit side, fundraising on the nonprofit side. We're also in an era of COVID and all the things. So everybody's world is kind of in a different place. So I'm just curious, kind of, before we talk about some basics, like how has COVID, or how do you feel like by understanding your financials? Hi, Jack. We got a little baby in the background, so we might hear him once in a while. But how has like having your planning in place kind of really helped you navigate through all of these sort of crises quickly and make decisions?
Well, so here's what I will say. When you have financial models that project, that you understand as the business owner, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, and you really know how to use them to your advantage. You know what the line items are. A business owner or a nonprofit, like, we will have a crisis happen. And when we do have a crisis happen, if you love your business or your nonprofit, you definitely need to know what the bottom line is. what sacrifices can I make as a business owner, not taking a salary for a month, and being able to know exactly what money is owed when things are tight or things have changed allows you to react to a crisis in a way that, is educated, versus just waiting till the end of the month and realizing, oh my gosh, I haven't, made good on some of these things, and being able to be proactive and call your vendors, call your health insurance providers and let them know, hey, we're feeling this crisis, whether it's COVID or not, and we need a little bit of grace on this. So I think that's the big thing in terms of finances with COVID is being able to communicate and plan ahead.
Yeah. And so for people that are kind of looking through their financial projections, what have you guys done, or how do you take a look at those on a weekly basis? Maybe we should just back up a step and just say, okay, if you're a newer organization or maybe a volunteer-based organization, maybe you don't even have financial projections in place. So maybe let's start there. Like, how do you even start the process of taking a look at, in a normal situation, what your financial projections are?
Yeah. So like we mentioned earlier, I am not a CPA, so I will tell you how we have done it.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of a 3-step process. The first I found really helpful is going back and looking at historical data. So there's 2 pieces to this. One, if you're that business owner or the person who maybe relies on a small salary from a nonprofit, you should download a year of your bank history and understand what, at a minimum, like what do you really need to survive? Because when things get tight, you're going to need to know what your bottom line is. If you have historical data for your business, for example, and you're deciding, okay, I want to understand this better, same thing, download whatever, at least a year. If you have less, that's fine. But what's nice about that is now you can identify, okay, here are monthly expenses, here are, annual expenses, here's an expense that happens every 2 years, so on and so forth. Because now you're able to take all of that information and project it to say, okay, now that I know historically what I've needed to spend, now I can make a model that looks future and basically lets you know, come January, I'm going to have to pay for my DBA.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of thing. So that's kind of the first part of it, is look historically and use that information to inform your projections moving forward. Moving forward, you can use that historical data, but you also really need to think, what is going to be different? How is my business going to change? How do I want to grow it? So what milestones are there and what expenses are there that I believe, would occur because of that? And that's not easy. I'm a really visual person, so I actually like to make a timeline personally and just write it all out.
So like in step 1, you're kind of just figuring out basic cash flow. Like, what do I actually need to cash flow my business? And in step 2, you're kind of starting to go into a scale mode of, okay, if I want to do more marketing, if I want to buy more infrastructure, if I need to get more product, like I'm going to need to ramp up to support that. Right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Or I don't want to do my own bookkeeping anymore. So by, January 2021, I want to pay a part-time bookkeeper to come in once a month and, make sure that everything is up to date. So in that place, you really have to visualize where you are. You have to ask yourself questions. And the thing that I like to do the most is I like to say, okay, I'm going to put myself, so I'll use the example of our company. So I'll say, okay, I'm in the greenhouse. The greenhouse is built. I have 2 employees. I have 100 plants in this room and 200 plants in that room. What do I need? And I'll do that for various scenarios to then understand, to really just put yourself in that space and think, what do I need? I need toilet paper.
Right.
I need, like everything, like what do you need to make this work?
Yeah. No, it's smart. And I think that also helps you then when you're figuring out what you like if you have to cut back, then you've already sort of prioritized the expenses that are must-haves, the expenses that are nice to have, and the expenses that are kind of luxury items.
Yeah, and if you want to get really fancy with it, in Excel, you can utilize columns to kind of designate certain expenses, whether they're, annual, monthly. You can say what is necessary, what is a luxury, things like that. And now you're actually really quickly, when things get challenging, you're really able to identify, okay, I can cut all of these things. Excel is incredible. You can have equations in there to make it really easy for yourself to make little adjustments and then look at it from a big picture.
So you obviously you've done your financial projections, and does that also help you to understand, okay, like, because you are, fundraising for your business and then fundraising for the nonprofit organization that you're in, which we can talk a little bit more about here in a minute. Does that also help you then figure out, okay, in this time period of crisis where things are, the world as a whole is different than what anybody could have anticipated. I now have X amount of space. Like I have 3 months where I know I'm okay before I have to be in crisis mode, or, like this is when I need to start to scale back because based off historical data, this is what my income is going to look like.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something, for us, because we weren't in sales for quite some time, being able to really project and say, here is my burn rate. This is how far it's going to take me. So I better not wait, a month to make my pitch deck, right? I need to have made it 3 weeks ago.
Right. Right. So let's talk about Cascade Cannabis Association. Did I just say that right or wrong?
Yeah, Cascade Cannabis Association.
Okay. So let's kind of talk about that for a second, as far as like, you had all these plans for this year. You guys had kind of thought about really doubling down on events and kind of generating income in that way. So having those projections for your nonprofit, what did that do, and how did that shift your guys' perspective and how you moved forward with your plans for the year?
Yeah, well, for us, we're a pretty small budgeted organization. So really we rely on membership fees, sponsorship. For the events that we had planned for this year, they were sponsored by Juniper Labs. And the main thing that we just had to do was, communicate both to the venue that, we're interested, but obviously we can't put the event on. And then to our sponsors to just, we're still moving forward, but we're delayed. And also just letting our newsletter folks know, we're not falling off the face of the earth, but yeah, this was going to be the year of events, ironically, and now it is not.
Yeah, right. Well, and I think going back to what you said a lot earlier, like communication is key, whether it's talking to your audience or your vendors or your sponsors. It's all about open and honest communication so that you can find a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, because, in the nonprofit world, like, money matters quite a bit, and the relationships with the people that sponsor your events, like that matters a lot. And so making sure that everybody is feeling like those dollars are well spent. Because, for events, you're putting deposits down and to hold your space. So just making sure that everybody feels like that investment is being watched, that we're not just going to lose sight of it. That's, I think, the important thing. And, like I mentioned, our nonprofit is a pretty small budget, but on a bigger scale, when you have people putting money in for the goodness of their heart, maybe it's water conservation, and you have private donors coming in, and you kind of have something like COVID happen, you really have to communicate to those folks, don't worry, here, we're still true to our mission. We're still going to utilize these funds in the way that we said we would, but, here's what has changed about things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So are you kind of working through a period of, okay, I had my financial projections done. This is what we expected 2020 to look like. And, in your case, it could be there could be a whole host of things, right? It could be COVID. It could be you have some sort of disease come through your greenhouse. I mean, that's not going to happen. But, I mean, like there's all sorts of things that could happen. And so for you, is it like we have these financial projections so that it's really easy for us to then communicate to our investors and communicate to those that participate with us to say, okay, this is what happened, but because of this, we have a plan and we can very quickly switch to that plan in order to still support, maybe a percentage of that, or it might not be the whole thing, but this is what our plan is. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to tackle this. So you can go into problem solving mode instead of just reactive crisis mode.
Yeah. And so I'm glad you brought that up because I'll give you a really real example for us. We have a production license that's farming. We have a pending processing license that is to turn the flour into concentrate. And unfortunately, OLCC was already pretty backed up in terms of those applications. When COVID came, OLCC is kind of like, we're going to take a pause on this. We were already slow, but now we're pausing. So we had to communicate to our investors, we gave you financial projections, you invested money. Well, now this has happened. And that was definitely a significant part of the revenue that we would have. Therefore, this is our plan moving forward. And so earlier I mentioned, look at your historical data. Use that to inform your projections. Think about where your business is going to be. Put yourself in the space. Put yourself exactly where you want to be. Once you've done that, something that is incredibly helpful, it takes some, magic in Excel, a little time there, but if you can create a variables page so that you can immediately make adjustments. So for example, we think we're going to make X amount of concentrates in 2021, for example. Well, what happens if that is zero? And now our flour sales are double because we're no longer processing.
Mm-hmm.
Now I also have a variable page to be able to adjust price per pound, price per gram in terms of concentrates. I can adjust yield. So Craig and I can sit in the office and run these scenarios and go, well, what happens if we get 50% of the yield we thought we were going to get? What happens if we get double? What happens if we want to pay our employees $2 an hour more? What happens if we want to give people bonuses? We're able to do these adjustments in the office and then spit out a model that can represent different scenarios because that's really what lets us plan for the future. And it helps our investors to feel that we're not just shooting in the dark. But if any one of my investors wants to ask me, what would happen if half of your crop failed because, I don't know, power outage, right? Something happens. I can basically within 24 hours get back to somebody and let them know, here's what that looks like. And if I haven't thought that through, it doesn't take that long to adjust in Excel to make some of these tweaks.
Well, it's not always a negative, right? I mean, there could be some organizations that because of COVID are actually seeing an increase in a surplus because of the audience they serve. And, it could be, healthcare type situations or because of all of the racial inequality conversations that are having, like it could be both ways. Like you could all of a sudden find yourself not being able to support your audience because the people you serve because you weren't expecting the increase. So having those spreadsheets can help you in both ways.
Yeah, because if you find out, I'm going to have to serve, 20% more veterans in the next 3 months. I know that I have 3 full-time staff that can serve my current output. Therefore, if I have, a 20% increase in people we need to serve, I'm going to need to hire and train this many people. And furthermore, here's what it costs for me to onboard somebody.
Yeah. No, that's so good. So do you have... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and really that kind of goes back to this idea of everyone's business is different. So getting a template for a cash flow statement and all of these like P&Ls and things like that, that's a good start. But you really have to think about putting yourself in the space of where you are and what it means. What does that P&L mean for your business? Don't just end at a template because things are different for every single business.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what I was going to ask was, your crisis management plan is going to look very different for your business, for the nonprofit you sit on, and for every other organization, because, we need to think about things outside of the pandemic and think about things like, what if something happens with a board member that's a little bit scandalous, or what if you're in a pet business and like a humane society or something, and there's some disease that comes through your facility, like all of like there's all these things, and it's all unique to what you're doing. And so the financial projections can really help you pivot quickly and understand like where you need to move funds around to support that.
Yeah, and going back to the fact that whether if it's for-profit in your fundraising, or even more importantly, if it's nonprofit in your fundraising, the confidence in the folks funding your business, that is so key. And personally, for me, not being a finance person, I studied biology, so I'm not even a business person by trait necessarily. So for me, I really had to know that the math was panning out, that I had done due diligence on myself, maybe even more so than potential investors would do due diligence. And I would add the layer that in the world of nonprofit, you are oftentimes going back to the same pool of people every single year to fundraise. So you really want to make sure that those people are confident, that your mission and your values, all of those things play strongly into making sure that you do have the cash flows you need, especially for nonprofit.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. So how was it that you learned like what to ask yourself or how to prepare yourself for the conversations? Like if you don't really know the questions that are going to come at you, because that's just not the world you were living in initially, like what did it take for you to kind of learn that, and how have you honed in, or what tools have you used to kind of keep track of those questions so you can answer quickly?
Yeah, so a couple things. When I first started fundraising for our family's farm, I'm not even joking, I went online and I Googled questions investors ask you.
I love that.
And
I love that.
Along with vocabulary and investment. So, I'd have my flashcards, right? And then I would have this list of 120 questions that you could get asked by an investor. And I'm no joke, I would go through those 120 questions, and in my head, I would know if I could respond to them. And it's funny because one of the questions was are you sure you're not leaving money on the table? And of course I had to open a new tab and Google, what does it mean to leave money on the table? Because, there's a whole language and culture behind investment. And I'm telling you, if you don't have confidence in it, it is possible you will not close funds because it's just a red flag. They can smell the blood in the water.
Yeah. And that's confidence in not just what you're doing, like what your business or organization does, but also confidence that you're worth the investment individually.
Yeah. And, having your mission statement, having a set of values, that is also really important when it comes to taking people's money, because it's okay if you don't have the answer to everything, but if you have a good mission statement and if you know what your values are, you can feel comfortable saying, you know what, I don't know the answer to that question, but here's the thing. One of the values in this organization is transparency. So just give me a week. I'm going to get the answer for you. And I so appreciate you asking this question because, it's opened up an opportunity for me to dive deeper into this business. So being able to have that foundation of what you really stand for, I think really helps in terms of the confidence piece. And then obviously mentoring. If I hadn't found good mentors, I also was able to get free pitch coaching through EDCO here locally. And that was all incredibly valuable, going back to the confidence piece and knowing how to speak and walk the walk.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. I love that humble piece of just, we don't always have to have the answer. as long as we have enough of the infrastructure in place that we know we can find that answer quickly, and knowing that investors and donors are honestly okay with that. But when you don't have the foundational elements in place to get those answers correctly and quickly, that's when it kind of falls apart.
Yeah.
And then for those of you that are not in Central Oregon, EDCO is our economic development for Central Oregon. And so, definitely reach out to those resources in your local community. Most areas have their economic development teams in place to help kind of build and grow. So look out for those resources as well. So I guess what else, I know that pitching for you is a big thing. I know that fundraising for you is a big thing. What else has been a great tool in your toolbox, I guess, or support for you, and feeling that confidence to go in and kind of ask for those dollars, and kind of set yourself apart from other people in your field?
Yeah. So a while back, it was suggested to me to read the book, Think and Grow Rich.
Okay.
And, I come from a science background. So before I would hear people talk about affirmations, and I'm kind of like, wooey, wooey,
Yep.
And let's be real about this. I now have in my project management software every single day a set of affirmations that I say to myself, whether it's out loud or in my head, but
Yep.
that has honestly brought a lot of confidence. And sometimes when things got really hard for us, I would drive across the field of our property, pull over and look at our property and say, I see the greenhouse. It's right there. I see it. It's tan. It's beautiful. It's ginormous. It's amazing.
Yeah, you did that. Right?
So definitely so it's putting it out there and saying to yourself, I will close this fundraising round. I am worth every dollar raised. My company, my organization is worth every dollar raised. We are doing good work. We will continue to do good work. Reaffirming to yourself, that ultimately gives you confidence later when someone does put you in the hot seat and they're asking you a lot of questions, because I really think most people are investing, in the vision, in the mission, but really it's the execution, which they're investing in people. And that's incredibly true in the nonprofit world. So if you're not reminding yourself why you're doing this, you may not be able to speak that very well to the people that are funding it.
And have you also worked on mindset and affirmation stuff around, I know this is kind of getting a little bit away from financial stuff, but have you also worked on that where if people say no, or they choose not to fund with you, that it doesn't necessarily mean that your organization is bad or you did a bad job, but it's that they just weren't the right fit for your, it just didn't align?
Yeah. And the thing that I think, when a door closes, another one theoretically opens somewhere in the universe. And so one, asking that person, why was this not a good fit? Because there's two reasons to do that. One, you may find out that there's something you can fix, that there's something you can improve upon. So that's great. But the other thing is maybe they say, you know what, you haven't raised enough money. I don't really feel comfortable being, an early investor in this. I'm just not ready. You're just not far enough along. Well, okay, throw that name in your project management software to remind you to follow up with them when you are further along, because that was why it didn't work for them. And they may be a great ally moving forward. Furthermore, maybe they say, you know what, COVID just hit. It's really not a good time for me.
Right.
And you go, okay, totally understandable. Well, do you know anybody who maybe is a good fit? If COVID is why you don't want to invest in this or support this organization, do you know somebody who's in a different position who can?
Yeah. Or could I follow up with you in 3 months, 6 months time as things kind of clear up?
Yeah. So I think, hearing no, it's going to happen. And especially with fundraising, I think you just have to assume that you're going to knock on a certain number of doors and they're either just not going to open, not respond. And you just have to know that going into it. And, you know, you don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste someone else's time just as much as yours. So if someone says no, don't take it personally. You want to be inquisitive. You want to find out why it wasn't a good fit and how you can work with that moving forward.
Well, and that's another data projection, right? For your financial projections. If you reach out to 15 companies and, you know, on average you close 3 of them, like, then as you project into like what you need to do in order to hit your goals, you know how many, you know, like, I got to hit 30 companies in order to hit this number, because on average we close this percentage and we close them at this dollar amount. So that's all just kind of playing into your historical data.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And then I'll also just throw this out there, because I can't tell you how many times I've had this in my mind. There's that scene in Pretty Woman where she goes back into the store with all of her bags of goodies, and she goes, "You work off commission, don't you?" You know, big mistake. So I can't tell you how many times when things got tough fundraising that I would like visualize that scene and think, you know what, it's okay. One day I'm going to pull the Pretty Woman move, and that organization or that venture capital fund is going to look back and go, big mistake.
I love that so much. That's so good. That is so good. And it's so true. And I also think about how many times have you, like, you collective, right? You reach out to somebody and it doesn't work out. And then 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, 3 years down the road, all of a sudden out of the blue, that organization shows up again and says, you know, I remember that conversation we had with you a while back. We weren't ready. We're ready now. And you made a big impact based off of how prepared you were, how confident you were, like your mission, blah, blah, blah. So even if it's a no right now, like being prepared and prepped for those conversations can still leave a lasting impact.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing too is maybe they weren't a good fit for you, because going back to that whole morals and values and mission statement, I can look back on some of the conversations I've had and realize that some of the no's that we got that were tempting, tempting offers that we ultimately turned down, it's because it wasn't in line with where we wanted to take things and what our values were. And that's important too, that with fundraising, you can feel like you're in a hard spot. You know that you're about to run out of money because you did your financial projections. So you have to know, what is it worth to you?
Yeah. No, it's so true. And how have you, when you've had your back against the wall, even if you, I know that you've had things that you've said no to in really hard times, like, what does that feel like? Like, how do you make that gut choice knowing that it could ultimately be a very serious detriment to your business? Is it just gut reaction?
Yeah. I think for us, like, you know, our family's farm, the founders are myself, my husband, and my brother-in-law. And there have been times where, you know, Chris and I, my husband, were like, we're not getting any younger. Like, we should take this deal, you know, and, you know, we want to have a baby. And, thank God Craig was there at times to say, guys, like, we stand for craft cannabis. We stand for really excellent product. And I just don't think that this is going to work if we sell out right now. So having the support of your team and making sure everybody's on the same page, because sometimes it's going to feel really tempting, and you need to have the people, your tribe around you, to remind you why you were here in the first place.
Yeah, so I love it. So it's like your financial projections to give you the cash flow, and then your really core mission, vision statement to center you into making those decisions that are right for the long term of the organization. And then having that little bit of woo-woo there, right? Where you're like, the door is going to open. It's going to open. All of them together.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're a sole entrepreneur too, you know, maybe you need to have like a good board of advisors, or a good group of people that can kind of keep you to your true north.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's bring this all kind of back for full circle. And so kind of the way that you have been able to be successful, and not to minimize it to just this, because I know it's so much more than this, but one of the big contributing factors has been really understanding what your history is in your financials, where you're going, what your long-term goals are, pulling that all together to see big picture so that you can make the right decisions for your business in times of crisis and in times of stability. And then having the confidence to kind of trust in that and that mission to push your business forward. Is that the oversimplified version?
Yeah. And I think the big point that has really helped us specifically with projections and financials is that ability for those models to be dynamic by having that variables page that ties into your cash flows, your P&Ls, all of that stuff, because that is really what lets you pivot when the crisis is going to hit.
So if somebody's wanting to geek out on Excel and just doesn't know how, like, where did you learn how to kind of create all these formulas and all of these dynamic spreadsheets?
Well, I will say Craig was definitely the mastermind behind the Excel sheets. So he did most of the input. And I mean, I would say if you're not great at Excel, there's a lot of online support you can get these days. I call it Excel. It's like calling a tissue, like tissues.
Yeah. Kleenex.
Or Kleenex. It's like calling a tissue Kleenex, but I actually use Google Docs. I find it to be really idiot proof. And it's very collaborative. So, you know, I can be in my home and I can call Craig at 9 p.m. and say, hey, get on this sheet with me. You know, let's talk through this, whatever it is. So just using online resources and really being inquisitive. I'm not great at math, like advanced math, but for financials, you don't necessarily need super duper advanced math.
Yeah.
You know, you need multiplication, addition, subtraction, maybe some division here and there. But for the most part, it's pretty simple math. And, you know, being able to just think ahead of time, how do I want this model to work dynamically? We constantly ask ourselves that. How do we make this dynamic every time we make changes to it? And also just being organized. When you make copies of things, pop a date on there so that you can remember why you did things. If you're going to make a change to a certain cell, there's a way to put a comment in there. So put a comment like adjusted this because of this, because 3 months later, you're going to look back and go, well, why did we do that?
Yeah, totally. Yes. Yes. I reconcile bank statements for a client and it's like a week ago. They're like, what was that? I don't remember. So yeah. Notes are key.
Yeah, I mean, you can get like our financial models at this point are like multiple sheets. I mean, they are really intense. So being able to track why you're doing things. But I really feel like, you know, going back to your business is unique. So like starting with a template is great. But when it really comes down to it, you know, my business is totally different from your business, Sammy. And my model, I promise you, would never work for your business. So the template's good, but you know, it's just a starting point.
Yeah. I love it. So start with Excel, just start to put some historical data in there, start to just pay attention to your expenses so that you know what your cash flow is going to be, pay attention to your income. I just think it's a super important super important conversation to have with your team so that you can pivot quickly and you don't get into a situation where you can't provide those services to the people that really need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Lindsey,
and the good news is too, you can start this and then have a professional go ahead and dive into it too. It doesn't just have to be what we did where, you know, we really DIY'd everything. We're very bootstrapped. Like you can just start to do the homework and then let the CPA then take over it. But at least you've started it. At least you've really thought through and said, here's the variables I think we need to focus on. Help me turn this into a model.
That's such a good point because nobody knows your business or cares about your business as much as you do. So they can't interpret the data in the same way you do. So good. Anything else you want to mention about financial projections? Otherwise, I mean, how can people kind of find out more about Glasshouse Grown and the Cascade Cannabis Association?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the main thing I would say about projections is, you know, I don't love doing bookkeeping. I don't love by any means doing any of it. However, it is like, if you can have a curious mindset to it and be able to tell yourself, yeah, like this is sort of like taking the trash out. Like it has to happen, you know? But furthermore, like I now know my business so much better because of doing that. And it does get exciting because that is how you're going to grow your business. So have the sense of curiosity behind it. So it's not just this mundane task. For sure. I think the mindset is really important. And then in terms of learning more about some of the things I'm involved with, you know, if you are interested in supporting the legal cannabis space, definitely check out Cascade Cannabis Association. Even if you're not a local and you just want to support, you know, good folks doing good work, definitely check out our website. You can just Google Cascade Cannabis Association, maybe Central Oregon in there, it will pop up right away. And then in terms of our company, Glass House, if you're not in the state of Oregon, I'm sorry, we as a country are not progressive enough for you to be able to get a hold of our products. But if you are in Oregon and you are interested in some really good top shelf craft cannabis, go ahead and Google Glass House Grown Oregon and you can learn all about what we're doing.
Yeah, and we will link up all of that in the show notes, and hopefully, you know, as the months go on, that will change and you'll be able to support more people outside of Oregon.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Love it. Well, I so appreciate you coming and talking about financials. I just love your perspective on all of it, especially because you're not a financial person. I think it's so good for us to kind of feel comfortable with numbers. It's a scary thing. So I know it's something I'm working on all the time mentally to like be okay with numbers and work through it. So thank you for sharing your perspective. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Big shout out to Lindsey for joining me on this episode. I, am definitely one who avoids financials, and I learned a lot from her as well as we had this conversation. I hope you did as well. So head on over to thefirstclick.net/podcast for all of the show notes and additional resources that we can share with you. And I hope you'll subscribe wherever you listen so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you in the next one.